The scream tore through the night like a blade, echoing from the tree line where shadows swallowed the dirt path. Ethan gripped the flashlight, his knuckles pale as he whispered, "Did you hear that?" Rachel clutched his arm, trembling as the sound came again, ragged and inhuman. Mark tried to steady his breath, muttering, "It could be a coyote," but his voice cracked with doubt. The forest seemed alive, each rustle of leaves like footsteps circling closer. A rotten stench drifted on the damp air, so thick it made Emma gag. The group's headlights cut across the trees, revealing claw marks etched deep into bark, still dripping with sap. Ethan's heart hammered as the silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Then, just beyond the glow, two towering shapes shifted, and the branches bent as if something massive slid between them. Rachel whispered, "That wasn't human," and the dark answered with a guttural growl that froze them all in place. The silence after the growl was worse than the sound itself. Every leaf crackle amplified until Rachel swore the forest was breathing. Ethan tried to steady his hand, the flashlight beam jittering across branches like nervous eyes. Mark muttered, "We should turn back," but Emma cut in sharply, "If we leave now, we'll never know what it was." The dirt road stretched behind them like a grave waiting to swallow their retreat. Then from the trees a low rhythmic thud began, like footsteps pacing just out of sight. Rachel whispered Ethan's name, her voice trembling. His answer never came, because from somewhere ahead came another scream, this one higher, broken, undeniably human. The scream tore through them like glass shattering in their skulls, leaving silence thick and suffocating. Emma stumbled backward, nearly tripping on loose gravel, her eyes darting wildly. Mark grabbed her arm, his voice shaking as he said, "It's close." Ethan stepped forward despite himself, his body rigid, whispering, "Someone needs help." Rachel pulled at his sleeve, her voice sharp, "That wasn't a person." The words clung in the air, bitter and cold. The flashlight caught a fleeting reflection, two gleaming points low to the ground, vanishing as quick as they appeared. The air felt charged, a storm building unseen. The woods exhaled a sudden gust that extinguished the sense of safety entirely. Rachel's hair whipped across her face as she screamed Ethan's name, but he kept his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows. Mark's breath came fast, his boots scuffing against gravel as if ready to flee. Emma shivered, whispering, "We shouldn't be here," but her voice was drowned by the sound of cracking branches in the dark. Something large was circling, each step deliberate, each pause taunting. Ethan lifted the beam higher, his jaw set, and muttered, "If it's human, we'll help. If it's not..." The rest trailed off in the tension. The beam caught it for a heartbeat, towering legs covered in thick matted hair, vanishing into the black before any of them could process. Rachel choked on a gasp, her eyes filling with tears. "Tell me I didn't see that," she begged. But Ethan's silence was heavier than any answer. Mark swore under his breath, his shoulders shaking. Emma covered her mouth, the scream caught in her throat, her whole body trembling. The woods had been holding secrets, and now they had shown their keeper. Somewhere deep among the trees, a guttural rumble rose, promising that what they saw was only the beginning. Morning light did little to erase the memory of what they had seen, but it gave them the false comfort of safety. Ethan sat at the worn wooden table, staring at his untouched coffee as Rachel tried to steady her shaking hands. "We can't pretend it didn't happen," she whispered, her voice cracking. Mark slammed his palm on the table, muttering, "It was nothing, just shadows." Emma's eyes burned with anger as she shot back, "Shadows don't scream." The air inside the cabin felt heavier than the forest, thick with silence and disbelief. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. Something was out there, and it wasn't human. Rachel's voice broke as she confessed, "I can't stop hearing it. The sound won't leave my head." Ethan leaned toward her, his face shadowed by worry, whispering, "You're not alone, I hear it too." Mark rolled his eyes, his tone sharp, "You're feeding her fear." Emma snapped, "You're blind, Mark, and that makes you dangerous." The argument filled the small space, each word louder, each breath heavier. Outside, the wind rattled the window frame, as if reminding them the forest was listening. Silence returned when Rachel's hands began to shake uncontrollably, her cup shattering on the floor. Later that afternoon, Emma wandered outside, her gaze fixed on the tree line where the shadows seemed thicker than they should. She whispered, "I saw eyes," and Ethan joined her, scanning the brush with narrowed eyes. Mark followed reluctantly, muttering, "You people are losing it." Rachel stayed near the cabin door, her face pale, whispering, "It's watching us, I feel it." A branch cracked deep in the woods, loud and deliberate, silencing them all. Ethan gripped the flashlight even in daylight, his jaw clenched. "Tracks," he said, pointing to the dirt, where fresh impressions pressed into the soil. As dusk fell, the old neighbor, Mr. Harris, approached, his limp heavy and his weathered face marked by years of silence. Ethan called out, "You've seen it, haven't you?" Harris paused, his eyes dark, muttering, "Some things aren't meant to be spoken." Rachel pressed him, her voice desperate, "Please, tell us." His gaze shifted to the forest, lips trembling. "It's older than any of us, older than these woods." Mark scoffed, but his bravado cracked when Harris whispered, "It knows you now." The words cut deep, heavier than the night closing in around them. Night crept in again, pressing against the cabin walls with invisible weight. Rachel sat by the window, whispering, "It hasn't left us." Ethan kept pacing, muttering, "We can't hide forever." Mark snapped, "We shouldn't even be here," but his words rang hollow. Emma's eyes watered as she admitted, "I'm scared it wants me." Silence thickened as a shadow passed across the window, taller than any man, lingering for a breath before fading. Rachel's gasp broke the silence, her trembling hand pointing. "It's here," she whispered, and the dread became undeniable. By morning, the ground around the cabin told its own story. Ethan crouched low, tracing the outline of massive footprints pressed deep into the mud. Rachel gasped, her hand covering her mouth as she whispered, "No man could make that." Emma stood frozen, her breath clouding in the cold air, muttering, "It's real." Mark kicked at the dirt, his voice cracking with frustration. "This doesn't prove anything." But even he flinched when Ethan said, "It walked right up to the door." The silence that followed was heavier than words, every step pressed into the earth, a reminder they were being watched. Later that day, they followed the tracks into the forest, each step deeper into dread. Emma whispered, "It's leading us somewhere," and Ethan nodded, his grip tight on the flashlight despite the daylight. Rachel's eyes darted between the trees, muttering, "We shouldn't follow." Mark barked, "If we don't, we'll never know." The woods closed in, branches clawing at their jackets, the silence unnatural. Then the smell returned, foul and overwhelming, forcing Rachel to gag. Ethan stopped suddenly, pointing at a torn carcass of a deer, its body mutilated, ribs cracked open. The forest had offered its warning, and none of them spoke. That evening, voices carried through the trees, faint whispers that didn't belong to any of them. Emma clutched Rachel's hand, whispering, "Do you hear it?" Mark spun in circles, growling, "It's the wind." Ethan held the flashlight steady, the beam cutting across shadows that seemed to move with intent. Rachel's breath shook as she murmured, "It's speaking." The whispers grew louder, forming something like words, though twisted and broken. Mark shouted, "Stop imagining things!" But even his face drained of color as a deep growl followed, rolling through the forest like thunder. Back at the cabin, the group argued louder than ever. Rachel shouted, "It's circling us, it's not going to stop." Ethan snapped, "Then we face it." Emma's voice trembled, "We can't fight something like that." Mark banged his fist on the wall, muttering, "There's nothing out there but our own fear." The words felt empty, hollow against the pounding in their chests. Outside, something scraped along the wooden wall, the sound dragging like claws against bone. All four froze, every breath silenced. The forest no longer waited for them, it had come to their door. The scratching gave way to silence, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing just outside the door. Ethan raised his hand to quiet them, every nerve alive with fear. Rachel clutched Emma, her eyes wide with tears. Mark's face was pale, his bravado stripped, whispering, "It's right there." A shadow passed across the window, massive and deliberate, blocking out the lantern light for a heartbeat. Then from the darkness came the sound of knuckles rapping slowly against the door. 3 hollow knocks, each louder than the last. Forest was no longer a secret. It wanted inside. The cabin grew colder as night deepened, silence weighing like stone. Ethan studied the door, whispering, "It knows us now." Rachel shivered, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Mark leaned forward, his voice sharp. "We'll leave at dawn. This is madness." Emma shook her head, muttering, "We can't outrun it." Before anyone answered, Rachel's eyes widened. She whispered, "Mark, why didn't you tell us you'd been here before?" The room froze. Mark's face went pale, his silence louder than words. His secret had cracked open the air, and the others realized he had not told them everything. Rachel demanded, "You knew about this place, didn't you?" Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "I heard stories," he muttered, "but I never believed them." Emma snapped, "You lied to us." Ethan's stare was hard, his voice low. "You brought us here knowing." Mark slammed his fist on the table. "I thought it was just a legend." The lantern flickered as the words filled the cabin. Outside, the growl returned, deeper and closer, as if punishing them for the truth. Rachel whispered, "It's listening." Her words silenced the room, fear and betrayal tangled as one. The air shifted, cold rushing in as if the forest had entered the cabin itself. Emma screamed when she noticed the back door ajar, swinging slowly. Ethan lunged forward, flashlight beams slicing into darkness, but the night gave nothing back. Rachel clung to Emma, her voice trembling. "It took someone." Ethan counted under his breath, realizing with dread, "Where's Mark?" Silence answered. His footprints trailed into the woods outside, fresh and deep. Rachel's voice cracked, "He's gone." The truth cut sharper than the cold. The forest had claimed him, or he had walked willingly into its embrace. Hours passed, the woods alive with noises too deliberate to be wind. Then, from the tree line, a voice echoed, Mark's, calling Ethan's name. Rachel bolted toward the window, whispering, "He's alive." Ethan's face hardened, muttering, "That's not him." Emma sobbed, "It sounds like him," but the words outside dragged unnaturally, distorted like a recording slowed down. "Ethan." The voice groaned again, followed by a deep guttural growl. Rachel fell to her knees, tears streaming, whispering, "It's using him." The creature was no beast. It was intelligent, mimicking, taunting, drawing them closer. Ethan whispered, "It's not a hunter. It's hunting us for a reason." Rachel pressed against the wall, shaking her head, muttering, "Why us?" Emma clutched her arms tight, sobbing, "It knew we'd come." The truth pressed against them like the cabin walls themselves. They weren't victims of chance but chosen. A heavy thud rattled the door, dust falling from the rafters. Rachel screamed, "It's inside our heads!" Ethan steadied his breath, raising the flashlight like a weapon. The sound came again, louder, shaking the cabin. The creature wasn't just outside anymore. It was claiming its place in their story. The pounding at the door grew violent, each strike rattling the cabin like thunder. Ethan shouted, "It's coming through!" Rachel pulled Emma back, her eyes wild with panic. The lantern flickered as dust rained down from the rafters. Emma sobbed, "We can't stay here," her voice breaking into a scream. Ethan's grip tightened on the flashlight, sweat streaking his brow. Rachel whispered, "It wants us all." The wood splintered, a jagged crack splitting the door. Silence fell for a single breath before a roar exploded from outside, primal and furious, shaking the walls as if the forest itself had come alive. The creature's arm crashed through the broken frame, long claws slicing air inches from Rachel's face. She screamed, stumbling backward into Emma's arms. Ethan swung the flashlight, smashing it into the limb, sparks flying as the light died. Darkness swallowed them whole. Emma shrieked, "We can't see!" Rachel clutched her tight, whispering prayers into the dark. The growl filled the cabin, close enough to feel in their bones. Ethan fumbled for matches, hands trembling, muttering, "Hold on." In the black silence, heavy footsteps pressed closer, deliberate, patient, savoring the hunt. A sudden crash shattered the silence as a window burst inward, glass raining across the floor. Emma screamed, shielding her face as Rachel dragged her away. Ethan lit a match, the tiny flame shaking in his hands, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. The flame revealed the outline of a hulking figure outside, taller than the doorway, eyes glinting red. Rachel gasped. "It's here." Emma sobbed. "It's going to take me." Ethan shouted, "Stay behind me." His voice cracked as the match burned down to his fingers, forcing him to drop it. Darkness swallowed them again, colder, hungrier than before. The door finally gave way, slamming inward with a crash that shook the floor. Ethan lunged forward, swinging a broken chair leg like a weapon. Rachel screamed his name as claws raked across the wall, inches from his head. Emma curled against the far wall, sobbing uncontrollably. The hulking shadow filled the doorway, its breath steaming in the cold air. Ethan shouted, "Go, get out through the back." Rachel refused, grabbing his arm, crying, "Not without you." A guttural roar erupted, shaking the very glass in the windows. The cabin was no longer shelter. It was their trap. The monster lunged, claws tearing through wooden beams, as Ethan shoved Rachel aside, taking the full force of its swing. He crashed against the table, groaning in pain. Rachel screamed his name, running to his side. Emma shrieked as the hulking form stepped into the lantern light, its towering frame covered in dark matted hair, eyes glowing red with hunger. Ethan struggled to stand, whispering, "Run?" Rachel froze, torn between love and survival. The creature growled, towering above them, its massive hand reaching out. The moment stretched like eternity, the climax of terror bearing down with no escape in sight. The cabin lay in ruins, wood splintered and lantern light sputtering weakly. Ethan leaned against the broken table, blood dripping from his side, his breath shallow. Rachel knelt beside him, whispering, "Don't leave me." Emma's sobs echoed in the silence, her hands trembling as she clutched her knees. Outside, the woods were still, but the air held weight, as though the creature lingered unseen. Ethan forced a smile, muttering, "We're still here? For now." His words were hollow, their victory nothing more than survival. The forest swallowed the night again, and its secrets pressed in tighter than ever. Morning light broke through cracks in the shattered walls, but it brought no relief. Rachel helped Ethan to his feet, his body trembling with weakness. Emma whispered, "What if it's waiting for us?" Ethan winced, muttering, "It doesn't wait. It chooses." They staggered outside, eyes darting to the tree line where mist clung thickly. The forest was quiet, yet every branch seemed poised to move. Rachel whispered, "We can't tell anyone, they won't believe." Emma looked at her, her face pale, and said, "Then it wins." Silence followed, heavier than the woods themselves. They made it to the dirt road, the trees pressing in on either side like silent witnesses. Ethan leaned heavily on Rachel, muttering, "Every step feels like it's watching." Emma's hands shook as she clutched her jacket, her eyes darting at every sound. A raven caught above, shattering the silence, and making them all flinch. Rachel whispered, "What if it follows us forever?" Ethan's gaze hardened despite his pain. "It doesn't follow," he said, "it haunts." The words left a scar in the air, heavier than the wound in his side. The road stretched endlessly, offering no safety. They reached the sheriff's office by midday, exhaustion painted across their faces. The officer frowned as they stumbled inside, Ethan nearly collapsing. Rachel blurted out, "It's real, it tried to kill us." Emma added, her voice cracking, "It's still out there." The sheriff sighed, shaking his head, muttering, "You people don't know what you saw." Ethan growled, "We know exactly what we saw." The denial burned worse than fear. Papers shuffled. The phone rang, and the world outside kept moving, indifferent. The truth was too heavy for anyone but them to carry. That night, Back in Rachel's home, silence blanketed the room, but sleep never came. Ethan lay on the couch, pale and restless, while Rachel sat by the window, staring at the tree line beyond her backyard. Emma whispered, "It feels closer here." Rachel's reply was a whisper, brittle and broken. "It never left." The air felt charged, a reminder that survival was not escape. The forest had marked them, claimed them. Ethan stirred, muttering in his sleep, his words twisted with fear. "It's still watching." The final truth pressed in. They were alive, but never free. The night was too quiet, pressing against Rachel's house like the woods had followed them home. Rachel sat by the window whispering to herself, "It's not over." Ethan groaned in his sleep, muttering words that made no sense, his body twitching as if caught in a nightmare. Emma hugged her knees, her voice trembling. "I hear it outside." The words froze Rachel, her eyes darting to the tree line beyond the backyard. The porch light flickered once, then died, leaving the glass dark. A single low howl drifted from the woods, long and mournful, shaking every fragile breath in the room. The following morning, Rachel ventured outside, her eyes heavy from sleeplessness. The yard was silent, but the dew on the grass revealed deep tracks pressed into the earth, circling the house. She froze, whispering, "It came here." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, pale but awake, his eyes wide as he saw the prints. "It never left," he muttered. Emma covered her mouth, trembling as she whispered, "It's marking us." The realization hit them all at once. They hadn't escaped the woods at all. The woods had followed them, its shadow now anchored to their lives. Later that evening, Emma sat on the couch, clutching a blanket tightly. Her voice was faint but clear. "I saw its eyes again, outside the window." Rachel turned sharply, whispering, "What did they look like?" Emma's lips trembled, red, but closer this time. Ethan stiffened, his jaw tightening, muttering, "It's not done with us." The fear that had started in the woods now lived in their walls, feeding on their every thought. Rachel whispered, "It's waiting." The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of something they could no longer deny. The house groaned under the weight of silence until a faint tapping began at the back door. Rachel stiffened, whispering, "Do you hear that?" Ethan moved toward it slowly, his every step echoing in the dark. Emma shook her head violently, crying, "Don't open it." The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, until it was a steady rhythm that mimicked the 3 knocks from the cabin. Ethan froze, realizing the creature wasn't outside, it was reminding them. Rachel whispered, "It's not leaving us. Ever." The air turned colder, their breaths visible, as if the woods themselves had entered the house. That night, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Ethan groaned in his sleep, whispering the same words over and over. "It's still watching." Emma shifted restlessly, murmuring, "It's inside now." The house was silent, yet the sound came, a slow, guttural breathing from the hallway, deep and animal, dragging through the air. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she turned toward the sound, her lips parting to scream. But the screen cut to black before a word escaped, leaving only the echo of that breathing. The story did not end. It only waited for the next night.